All right, Joe Kelly, welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Nick.
So you are a accomplished entrepreneur doing extremely well. Just raised a Series B with your company Unchained last year, which we'll get into all that. But I want to start with, you spent 1.5 years on a sailboat.
Yeah.
Traveling through the Caribbean. Tell me about that.
Yeah, and then some. Well, so I grew up, I was born in Anchorage, Alaska. Both my parents kind of got there in their adult lives. I think both called something different, sense of adventure. They each kind of were from families of like large amounts of siblings. For oddly, like the siblings all, they were the odd ones out. The siblings all kind of stayed in their hometowns. My mom was from Pittsburgh. My dad's from Montana. So I think for them, heading out to Alaska represented a breed of independent spirit, looking for something different. And so I was kind of born into that, or born with their influence, obviously. Unfortunately, I lost my mom to cancer when I was 13. She had been a smoker all her life, and 13 lung cancer and other things. I had metastasis at that point. So it was tragic to lose her. But I can recall, not long after, within just a couple of weeks, my dad pulled my sister, she's 3 years younger than me, aside in our kitchen. And he'd always talked about sailing. We would do summer trips. We'd go sail at a place outside of Anchorage. And as little kids, I've always been wanting to do this, where we like sail around the world, go cruising. I think I want to do it now. What do you think? And we were like, sure, Dad. I don't know how much choice we really had in the matter. But we sold everything and moved into a motorhome. We drove that from Anchorage to Florida over about 3 months, and then spent another 3 months or so on the East Coast and in Florida. During which time we bought a sailboat. My dad got a 38-foot catamaran. We named it after my mom, but it was Jean. And we took off from that. So that was almost 3 years that I spent on that. We went through the Bahamas, parts of the Eastern Caribbean, and much of Latin America. Finally, also going through the Panama Canal. So never made it quite definitely around the world. We kind of took more of our time with things and really tried to enjoy ourselves, and we really did. So that was a really eye-opening experience for me. It gave me a lot of insight into the world and what I wanted to kind of maybe be when I grew up. It gave me an appreciation and disappreciation, or skepticism too about America and a lot of traditional choices that get made here. And so it really set me on my journey early on in a way that I'm really grateful for, and the way I hope to repeat with my own family.
Hope you guys weren't typical angsty, rebellious teens. It would be tough to get away on a sailboat.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I had a lot of freedoms from which to drive those into meeting new people. There's not a lot of other teenagers, so there's also not a lot of other mirroring or co-influencing of maybe those attitudes, taking groups of teenagers off track at times. Yeah. But for me, it was still something really special.
Then what was one or two just the biggest takeaways from that really influenced your life after that?
I think one, definitely just the appreciation of alternative lifestyle choices we can all make at almost every dimension, from how we educate ourselves and educate our children. When I was doing school through that period, I was a high school student. I was doing independent study, and this is early 2000s. This is not really yet quite the advent of a lot of the way online learning, online courses have taken form. And so, but in those days, there were still some programs you could do online. And if I did schoolwork any week, I did maybe 3 or 4 hours, a couple hours. I wasn't really having to work really hard to just keep up with what was still a standard kind of quote high school education. So that really framed around how much time is just actually lost or spent in schools, just on not necessarily that core purpose of conveying knowledge, society's knowledge, and all these different subject areas into young minds. And and just what is there, what's possible from being an autodidact and deciding to take charge of your own education, read the things you're interested about, complete the work, that is just the minimum, but then go extra in the places you actually care about. And so, being in these communities and these islands or these places where the school is inside of an archipelago, and all the neighboring islands, for the school day, the kids hop on a little boat and go into school at the schoolhouse on the island. In those kind of environments, whether it was kind of more in the Grenadines, where I want to say I remember that taking place, or that's kind of more of a island chain or chain of smaller islands. There's no, the daily life of people around the world can be just so radically different than what we see and experience in a lot of the kind of everyday America. and often to be in the everyday America. Not for everybody. Sometimes we all have limiting constraints, but sometimes it's still just a choice, and you can like make a choice as hard as it is sometimes still too to go and have a different life. And so that there's some takeaways. That thing I can remember too, being in the middle of a long passage, and it was kind of, me, my sister, and my dad on the boat pretty much all the time. And so for a lot of these longer sailing and experience of going from place to place, it might be overnight or something, where you're on watch, and it's like, I'm on for 4 hours, my sister, my dad, kind of a thing. And I can just remember being within days of any point of land. This is on one of our bigger crossings, and just feeling the beauty and the majesty of just like everybody important is like right here. Everything, just almost everything that really, really matters is just like right here within 10, 15 feet of me. And so just what a powerful moment. And I just remember feeling washed in gratitude and love, and just appreciation for what it is to be this small boat on a big ocean, but with your people. So
yeah, that's a way to not be so egotistical, that's for sure. Just being an open vastness of space and being just a small boat within it.
Yeah.
Did you guys face any, like, I don't know, gnarly storms? And I mean, I feel like that's one of my biggest fears, just being out in the middle of the ocean with crazy waves and some crazy storms going on.
It's a natural fear for sure. Fortunately, we never had really nasty foul weather cause issues. Part of that's because, I mean, we're decent enough at forecasting and putting out like nautical weather updates, and it's probably even gotten better in the last like 15, 20 years since I was out there doing this full time. And so yeah, you just kind of I mean, it's your own. You're taking your life and your family's life and your home in your own hands when you make a decision to leave harbor and things like that. And so those kind of things on the line, a prudent sailor or person will check the weather before they go, or they'll check the forecast, and they'll make a prudent decision on, is it safe to go out or not. So with that in mind, you're just not leaving out for for bad weather. We have been on higher seas in places where like you're either just kind of forced, or you can't just wait for the perfect moment. But boats are hardy, man. Boats are really tough. Often boats can take way more than their owners can in terms of like, hardcore abuse and waves and wind. So I think that made a difference too.
Then when it comes to your education, I'm sure you had, like you said, you're following like a very basic curriculum. What were some of those extra things that you found yourself interested in?
Some of the things I remember, there's one course, I almost want to go back at times and find who the guy who did it was. And so all my studies were through Brigham Young University. We're not Mormons, but they had at the time, and they still have, like one of the leading independent study programs. And so a lot of professors and teachers are in the kind of Brigham Young College and University, and do these high school courses also. So one of the courses was on just values, and like kind of there's a tour through a couple different books, and how to kind of come up with your own personal values, and how to think on and reflect what are the values you want to pick, and what does it mean to live by them. And so I can't, without remembering what exactly those were, that was just kind of the thing that really resonated with me at the time too. Not long after, I think I read like one of the Ben Franklin biographies, and he talks about, or he's got like for a while he would maintain a ledger, right, of his day to day, and on the 8 things of temperance and other things that he kind of values. He'd ask himself if he performed at those that day, how well he did. And then that stood out. Also, a basic accounting course. I can remember taking just an accounting 101 course where the professor had you do like a faux lemonade stand, or just like a mock lemonade stand of setting it up, and then setting up your ledger and your assets versus your liabilities, and then really maintaining a double entry sort of ledger of debits and credits for each business transaction, as to build up your inventory of lemonade as you build up, and then as sales occur, and how those increment some of the different accounts. And so I just remember doing that. I remember enjoying it enough and knowing I wanted to be in business or do entrepreneurship, and I took that course seriously enough. And then the point I was starting to my first companies, and then being the de facto operator, accountant, finance person, I can just remember how thankful I was to have that kind of grounded idea, because things like the debit and credit, the double entry accounting systems are not intuitive. They're not this is how you think about it's going to work. It's really another layer of context you need to have when you start to work in that stuff that, yeah, just really prepared me, and still I think is, I mean, a good at least like 60% of what you need, or just gets you 60% of the way there towards kind of being maybe a business owner with an actual grounding in accounting and how your books work.
Yeah, have the foundation to build everything else off of.
Yeah.
And when you got off the boat, how old were you?
I was 18, yeah, because I was, having turned 18, I was kind of, as much as I loved it and I loved the life and I loved my dad and my family, I was ready to kind of get out on my own.
Yeah. And you go right to UT from there?
I actually took a year off, or there's a year there where part of getting out on my own was like, well, I need to make some money. And I knew a guy I'd met in you can imagine why this would endear him to me. His sailboat was called Cacafuego, which means shit fire in Spanish. And so you probably should do it in his 30s, but like, yeah, for me as a teenager, I thought he was quite cool. And then he'd worked for the merchant, or work as a merchant marines for a tugboat company out of the Northeast. And so when I was kind of complaining to him about like, how do I find some work? I mean, we're in Panama, so I'm not necessarily like going to get a job locally as easily. So, but the company he's with hired me on as a deckhand after I got my merchant mariner's license, and so it was a good move, laterally to go from like having lived on a boat and quote first mate, if you want, for a number of years, and just the knowledge and seamanship that maybe comes from that, and then to bring that into a tugboat environment. And that was more of a work for a month, have a month off, kind of like a shift, kind of like people work on oil rigs or with that kind of a work life pattern. And that was in New York Harbor area. So that was also really neat and eye-opening experience for me from the age of 18 to 19 to get to go and be in such like a historic harbor, be in such a also very kind of beautiful and grand harbor area. And so we were taking barges up as far north as Albany, so up the Hudson River. We were going to Boston. We were going to as far south as well as like Delaware and Philadelphia type areas. So really kind of a neat way to see the Eastern Seaboard as a youth. And then I also at that time was applying to colleges and thought I'd like to go to University of Texas at Austin. They're a pretty renowned business school that I thought would be cool to check out. And so got in, and yeah, after that year in the tugboat was, also pretty convinced at that point too. I knew I wanted to make money with my mind, not necessarily my body, and the kind of physical labor and physically intensive environment. As much as they're great people and still a great way to build a career, it was not what I wanted to do long term.
Yeah, I'm sure you met some characters on the docks of New York and Philadelphia. That's in
for
Boston,
sure.
That's for sure. That's about as salt of the earth as it gets.
Oh yeah.
What were you doing in those months off?
I was traveling. I really enjoyed just the freedom to have like money of my own, and so I visited friends at their colleges and a couple places. I also did a longer passage. I worked it, so I actually worked 2 months one time, and then took close to 2 months off in between stretches on the tugboat. And so during that 2 month off period, we planned with my family to go from Panama to the Galapagos and then over to the French Marquesas. So actually, that's kind of the big passage you make to cross the Pacific. That takes usually minimum, like no sailboat necessarily does it faster than like 17, 18 days, usually probably looking at just over 20, if not, a whole month or 30 days or more out at sea, between any side of land. And so we actually, we started that passage. We had the boat fully stocked and like ready to go as an ocean going thing that could support its 3 inhabitants for 45 to 60 days. And you leave from Panama. It's about 6 or 7 days to Galapagos, and then you kind of stage there, restock up, and then go out for that bigger passage. It just worked out such, I think it was good in the long run. I think somebody's looking out for us, but it was early enough in the season for the winds there that surprisingly, like, yeah, they're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, right around the equator or whatnot. Like it's the doldrums. It's what they call when there's just no wind. And so in the months of like kind of, December, January, February, that's the area is just kind of known for. There's the trade winds haven't repicked up. It's just seasonally there's not the wind you want as a sailboat to kind of keep you moving along. So we were the whole ride from basically Panama to Galapagos running our engines, or at least one motor, and then and not sailing, but the water was glass. Like, here it is, this is thousands of feet deep water, middle of the deepest blue ocean you can imagine, not a sight of anything, ship or bird or fish, or sometimes maybe fish, but like nothing. And it's just flat. It's like glass, like flatter than, a really still lake in the morning. So that was just kind of cool, but that it did mean that by the time because we were kind of still so early in the season and we were leaving the Galapagos for that bigger passage, my dad had kind of made the call. We puttered out for like 2 days, and he was just like, man, I think, let's just turn around. Like, we love the Galapagos. It was actually one of my favorite stops we'd made just because of the time it was for us and things like that. And you get like a 3-week visa there when you're a boat that they kind of let you stay before that you got to get on your way. And so we just we maxed out the rest of that time, brought the boat to mainland Ecuador, and then got back on the tugboat pretty much just after that.
Wow. Yeah, I can't imagine that. Just again, vastness of still water as far as the eye can see.
Mm-hmm.
I just spent about a year and a half ago, spent 8 months down in South America.
Oh, great.
Myself.
Whereabouts?
I started in Argentina. I was there for 3 months and did Buenos Aires for a month, backpacked through Patagonia for a month, then another month through Mendoza and just a couple other places as well. Then just kind of worked my way up. I did a month in Bolivia, which was amazing. 2 weeks in Peru. Was originally planning on doing like 6 weeks, 8 weeks in Peru, but this was right at the beginning of 2023 or 2023, and there was like riots throughout the country. There was upheaval going on in the government.
Political unrest.
Yeah, typical South America unrest a little bit. So I only did 2 weeks there, then 2 weeks in Ecuador, then 2 months in Colombia.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was an amazing trip.
Yeah, it's so cool. I mean, there's so much richness and a lot to experience in South America. And I've only done really the kind of northern parts between Venezuela, Colombia, and some of Ecuador, but I definitely want to do more.
Yeah, I highly recommend Argentina. Argentina was amazing, especially obviously Patagonia. That was kind of the main reason I chose to go down there in the first place. Between Argentina and I did a little bit of Chile and Patagonia as well, and just excuse me, just amazing, beautiful nature that is just second to none, really. Yeah. So nothing beats that. But to your point earlier, just like for me, it was a very eye-opening experience of just like life in the U.S. versus life in the rest of the world, and how vastly different it is, or how vastly different it can be. That we're in this bubble here in the U.S. that we think the world revolves around us, and to a point it kind of does, on a geopolitical level. But to get out and experience something different and see how the rest of the world is, it really changes your mindset and perspective on life in general.
100%.
And so you then went to UT just for a year.
Yeah.
School wasn't
so I knew. No, I mean, I think the boating experience definitely told me, again, you have choice, you have agency in life. You can choose, more than you might suspect about your life if you want. And so that also represented for me the idea of, well, I don't know that I want to, necessarily work for somebody or feel like I'm always under someone else's choice as to what I do on any given day. And so it felt like more of an entrepreneurial calling was going to be for me. For everyone worse, maybe starting my own thing or otherwise, quote, being my own boss. So that the narrator is like, so I know you're never your own boss. It's like he never was, because you have customers or investors or partners or people that you got to answer to. But then, at least coming to UT though at the time, and I'll credit them, they did a lot better in the business school for undergrads, because back then, man, I really shaped. It was like, in your first year, they make you take at least one of those semesters has to be a BA 101 class, kind of a charm school or business like polish, course of you make a resume that you send to the teacher. You do a mock interview with somebody to kind of get the EBs out of just what's it like to interview for a job somewhere. And so I'd already talked to a lot of adults. I don't really had enough mindset of knowing kind of what it's like to a little bit make one's way through the world. And so, I mean, being interviewed by a senior college student was a layup. And I remember even also just like submitting my resume, and under extracurricular activities, I'd included, 2.5 years or whatever as a first mate on a sailboat in the Caribbean. And I got that back with like a red line on it from like the professor questioning its appropriateness for the resume, as if like, oh, I think like, I think you want to include like professional activities. And I was just like blown away. I was just, and as an 18, 19-year-old as well, conscious of myself, conscious of my peers, that on their resumes or their extracurriculars might look like, volunteering somewhere or doing any number of like cool things, or like maybe learning swimming or whatever it is. But I just knew for myself, hey, that this actually differentiates me. Hey, this is actually like a unique worldly experience. And I knew in my heart of hearts, like I'm only interested in an employer who thinks that interesting. And when it comes time that I'm hiring people, I'm gonna want those resumes with people that have done stuff like that. And so really just sunk into me, just like what a cultural like miss, right? I just have different aims for myself than this school seems to, because it's very geared, and they get a lot of money from like the Ford and other corporates of the world, and you want to help you get a good job at Goldman Sachs. And so if that's that's those undergrad students like dreams, what they want, then like that's great, because that's a win-win for the employer, the school, and those kinds of students. But it wasn't for me. And so, and just knowing that I was ready to get started, that feeling like business happens in the real world, I think I need to launch out and like actually try starting business in the real world. And that was going to be where that was the education I needed, not necessarily what the school was going to provide.
How many businesses have you started over the?
I mean, and businesses, can be a spectrum, of course, of like what was more of a project.
Yeah.
I want to say like, at least 3 or 4, right? Or that have, sort of built up legs. The first company, the first business out of that school experience, I had a roommate, a friend from Alaska, actually a high school buddy, that moved down to Austin, and he'd been in the trades for a good while. His dad was a home builder. And he'd also dropped out of college to just find his own way in life. And so we decided to partner up on a residential contracting business. We did flooring, we did gazebos, we did, a bunch of almost anything we could get paid for that we had some skills in. And so that was a real experience. I mean, businesses like that, I think contracting is a very fundamental business activity. You're going in, you're talking to a customer, you're building trust, you're selling them potentially on an idea, you're solving a real problem for them in terms of something they need built or they need fixed or they want improved. And then you're going out, costing the thing. What does the materials cost? What's your time cost? What is your margin? How do you put that price in front of them? How do you negotiate with them if needed? And then you got to go deliver. And then you got to deal with the entrepreneur's conundrum of, are you spending time delivering the things you sold, or are you spending time selling things to then deliver on later? So that there's just a lot packed in there. That was probably about a good year that I was, full time on that. And then within that period, I met 2 guys who become my co-founders of, my first kind of like more real technology startup. And that contracting company, the partner of mine, he kept on with it. I kind of sold my share of the business, or my half, to another partner. But the 2 of them then kind of went on, and I transitioned into my next probably real company called InfoChims, which was, it really started in 2009, and it was, I still would label it like a big data startup, just as much as big data was sort of the industry term that came about through that era. And that was a 4-year journey of, again, a lot of lessons of more of the kind of tech startup nature. And was it take to build software? Was it take to build and sell software successfully to clients? And then we went through an acquisition. We sold to Computer Sciences Corporation in 2013. So also, just kind of a full cycle experience with that business.
Why did you choose tech startups versus, I don't know, more of a lifestyle business, I guess, or, just why have you kind of shot for the moon in what you're doing?
I mean, that's a good question. I think certainly back then it was about, I was 20, 21 at the time of kind of making those kind of decisions, and I knew I was ready to work at capacity, or I was like ready to maintain a list of priorities that was like my business, my girlfriend, which only came later, but that which, and then like, I don't know, my health, or like I didn't have kids, anything else. And so I just thought if I'm able, or if I'm at a point to just work all out, full court press on something that startups seem to have the promise, or seem to be the place you could put that kind of energy and come out financially well off at the other end. I think that can be a bit of a myth. I do think you can certainly go the other way, and sometimes it can be wiser too, but it just all happened that way. The thing I was passionate about, I was actually passionate about data. I considered it as a sort of a big, I don't know, technology wave. And so even in my criteria of how to apply myself at the time, it was, I want to work with the smartest people I could hope to work with, and I want to do it in a place that I will feel better about myself for having spent 5 years in it, because I'll know be more valuable to the world. And so data has not lost any of its importance. I think a lot of the trends and things that were there between cloud computing and data analytics and the technologies that work within that umbrella, and then now kind of AI. I think that some of those are part of a similar lineage, or just all part of a way. Like, yeah, I just felt like, well, if this doesn't work out, worst cases scenarios, needing to get a job, well, at least now I have this experience of this like cutting edge field that will translate somewhere, and somehow it can be valuable to somebody. So those criteria were what helped me through.
Yeah, makes sense. Then now let's get into what you're doing currently, which is you're the CEO of Unchained. Why did you decide to get into Bitcoin when you did? And what was the first time you heard of Bitcoin?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the first time I heard it. I know how I reacted the first time I heard it was because it was like, skeptical, or just everything I read from Warren Buffett, everything I'd read from anybody else, would tell me to discount or not trust what this thing purports to be, or its proponents. Yeah. But one of my co-founders at InfoChimps, a guy named Drew, he had learned about Bitcoin while we were building that business, and not unlike me, didn't have any time for anything else. And then after we sold the company in 2013, he approached me. He's like, "Hey man, I'm gonna buy some Bitcoin. I think you should too." And I was trying to be responsible. I wanted to buy a condo for my girlfriend and I to like move in together with, and stuff like that. And so I reciprocally convinced him that he should also buy a condo in Austin. And so thankfully, both real estate transactions worked out well for us, and also the purchase of Bitcoin for ourselves, also really worked out then. And I think for ourselves, not like others, once you kind of own something like Bitcoin, and if you are curious and you want to know how it works, it can really grab you. And then because you own it too, you're incentivized to learn. So he was kind of my Sherpa through a lot of those earlier days about more my technical questions about how it works. What are the things that make it actually, robust against attack, or what to really have these qualities of being intamperable, or permanent kind of record keeping qualities of the Bitcoin blockchain. He helped me kind of see why that was true, or why it was true then, and maintains truthfulness now. And then when he and I were talking about, we left the parent company after about a year and a half that bought our business. We were talking about what to do next, and we thought Bitcoin was something that we were in the right, hopeful, like timing gap of just early enough to not be one of dozens of competitors or companies doing a thing, and not, and yet still something like Bitcoin had enough real promise and enough like realness to it that we thought we could see it being a big thing in 6 and 10 years. And so, and I wanted something that I could maintain curiosity about over the lifetime of suffering that can be building a business and going through the kind of startups aches and pains. So yeah, just knowing that kind of intellectual curiosity is going to be in part what carried me through stuff. And Bitcoin is one of the it's a little buffet. It's a multidisciplinary buffet for all kinds of knowledge and things you could want to know about the world. So yeah, that's what's kept me in it.
Yeah, it's an endless rabbit hole that you'll never find the bottom of.
Mm-hmm.
And you're a good friend for getting into the real estate game back then, which I'm sure, again, like you said, you did well on, but he might be a better friend for getting you into Bitcoin at the time you did.
Yes. Yeah. And then we're co-founders here, and so like I think that that relationship it matters. I think that I'm really fortunate. I don't know of a lot of. I think some people get to start a business once with somebody really great, but to be able to start 2 businesses with somebody else really great and have a lifelong relationship is awesome. And then we brought, a lot of those lessons from that first business here. Number one being know who your customer is kind of from day one. I think that company, we went through a pivot midway through. We'd had an earlier model of who we thought our customer was, what we thought the product was, and how we kind of packaged the technology. But then really for the latter half of the business at InfoChimps, we changed out everything except for that technology component. So we had to redraft what our product was. We changed our client set. And pivots like that as a startup, if you're venture backed, it can be painful, cause a lot of dilution, a lot of challenges in doing that. And we were able to pull it off, but I didn't want to do that again. I wanted to know kind of who our customer was. And so really kind of also observing and seeing, I think, the ways the kind of crypto and blockchain industry and even Bitcoin a little bit in 2017, 18 was, going about the world and their work in a way of, here we think is this great solution, blockchain. Let's go shout from the mountaintops about that solution and go try to find problems it solves, or go tell people who have problems that they should use Bitcoin to solve it, or they should use blockchain to solve it. And the amount of venture dollars and media and conferences and stuff that's just like been burnt and lit on fire under that kind of an attitude, it's in the billions and tens of billions. So we instead were just let's know our customers. The customer's the long-term Bitcoin holder, like us. They own it today. They're like they own it in 10 years. What happens? What is the property of a person that when they own something valuable that they intend to hold for a long time after that? Well, usually you kind of look around, there's like service providers that prop up around that. It's Goldman Sachs, or JP Morgan, and private wealth management desks and service providers like that. And so we just thought as well, I think correctly at the time, mapping out, what the industry looks like in financial services and just acknowledging the attitudes that are prevalent then about Bitcoin and just the sneering or the, just inability, the absolute indigestion for anybody at a Goldman Sachs to want to take a Bitcoin seriously, let alone the people holding Bitcoin, let alone, again, these people might hold $10 million back then in Bitcoin, and now, of course, hold hundreds of millions of dollars, right? They held on to it. These are clients, people just like in traditional financial services, kill for. They would climb all over each other to get at that relationship and work for those people. So it was like kind of obvious to us that, somebody needs to do that for Bitcoin and Bitcoiners. So that was a lot of the early intentionality behind Unchained. We've grown our product suite. We started with a Bitcoin secured loan, taking Bitcoin's collateral, we'd lend against it with dollars. We really saw it as just kind of an opening. It didn't really exist in the market, and it kind of involved having to solve a bunch of different pieces at the same time between custody and understanding how traditional finance markets work, and then the regulations to actually be able to do lending safely and securely. So that just forced us through a bunch of learnings and a bunch of things that really made the Unchained platform set it on its course. And so now we've got more of a suite of products in trading and more standalone custody that doesn't require loans or another product. And we now have, we'll probably soon, by the end of the year, we'll cross 100,000 Bitcoin secured on the platform. So nearly $7 billion worth a day. And then over 7,000 clients and, good amount of trading volumes and lending activity and things like that we do on a daily, weekly basis.
Wow, that's amazing. How'd you go about getting your first few customers?
So we did in 2016. So we kind of knew by early 2016, we knew what we wanted to do as far as a target customer. We knew some inklings about the kind of products and the roadmap we might have for how we deliver them. And then, we wanted to do customer development. So we worked on trying to meet people locally in Austin that had Bitcoin, and then just validating, hey, would you take a secured loan? Would you want something else like this? If a product was coming to you and positioned itself like this, would you want to hear more? Would you consider that a place for where you might want to be a client? And so we just got enough positive reactions out of that. And then a few of those people became customers. A few of them became investors, actually, honestly, too. So we just kind of knew that that's what we wanted. And we'd had something like a network at that point, thanks to our first startup and our time in Austin, that some people that were good advisors or just people adjacent to us and friends, when we were telling them what they were doing, they would come up with, oh, well, I know this person, they own Bitcoin, you should talk to them. So that kind of thing would happen for us.
Were there any other products that you guys were debating on building a company around in the Bitcoin space beyond deciding on this?
I'd say we really, I mean, not a lot. I mean, we looked at other spaces, or we just considered like, each of us had some of our own experiences, positive, negative with construction. We saw that there's a lot of software needed, or a lot of utility that could be had inside of the construction industry. Everything from supply chain and to integrating also just like supply chain and 3D design software is more in a more integrated fashion. So no, I mean, once we settled on Bitcoin, it was then kind of like, I liken it a little bit to the kind of classic way Amazon is talked about, or Jeff Bezos talks about the inception of Amazon, of how they kind of, he's like, oh, internet, this is going to be huge. What do you sell on the internet? And then you develop a matrix of, well, if we're going to sell some things on the internet, what are the qualities of certain things that, either are, it could be like furniture. Oh, furniture has all kinds of different size boxes of things you're kind of selling, and all kind of different likenesses and likelihoods of like if it is going to work or not in that living room. Food and produce has shelf lives and those kind of issues. When you winnow down against all the constraints and the min-max kind of algorithm, you're looking at, well, books, they're all pretty standard. There's such a huge number of SKUs, or a huge number of possible books you could sell, but that like you're physically limited in Barnes and Noble store space. But on the internet, you're not limited. You can massive warehouse that can sell much more SKUs. So you just kind of find that place of optimality for what is that best first product to sell. And yeah, I think for us, I'll give us like a B, maybe B minus on that best first product to sell, because as well timed as I think a Bitcoin secured loan product was, as grateful as I am for all the learnings and lessons that came from it, really still what we found within 2 years of launching that product, that like just custody itself was enough to try to sell to people. Just, hey, you're already holding Bitcoin, you may want to consider how to hold it more securely. And that's just more of a perennial evergreen problem, that loans are still something you only really need when you have, or you're only really ready to sign up for a loan when you have need for that. Not always necessarily is it something that, so we would just experience periods of months of very reduced or low loan demand, often correlated with like bear markets or times when people weren't feeling very flush in their Bitcoin. And so it was really only after we launched the loan product and moved on to the custody, our standalone vaults product, that was more of a offering kind of a thing I could talk to anybody about, that on any given day they could potentially use, or it could be more relevant to them. And so I think if we had to do it over again, I would have probably tried to start there sooner, just start with the kind of custody core product offering. But even then, we only kind of discovered, or through the process of trying to create the ideal loan product and the ideal custody for that loan product, did we then kind of really land upon a lot of the realizations that drove the custody product. And so it's also an open question of whether we could have gotten here where we are today if we hadn't learned those things also.
Were you guys very intentional about your spend and just revenue coming in throughout bull bear cycles? Like, how did you guys kind of manage that with crypto being as volatile as it is? Is that something you guys thought about ahead of time, or just something that you guys had to learn on the fly?
Yeah, I mean, so having gone through an earlier startup experience, that we did raise a couple $1 million at, but also, we never got to profitability. We weren't like drowning in revenue, things like that over there. So I'd had the experience as sort of a entrepreneur of just like being lean and watching every dollar. So that was here early. We were fortunate to be able to raise a couple $1 million in our seed round here at Unchained. And Drew and I would joke, and we would say at the time too, probably would have raised a lot more if we'd done another data startup. I think the fact of being, even though we're second time entrepreneurs at that point, with an exit under our belts, like a lot more investors would have signed up for Joe and Drew doing another data thing versus Joe and Drew doing Bitcoin. So yeah, and a lot of our early years were marked with austerity, were marked with like, not having, barely having enough cash in the bank for another month or two of payroll. And so that was just a lot of like fundraising, constantly, and while at the same time trying to execute on everything else we needed to do. So that, and there's a time even, one thing, it was the sale of my condo in early of 2020. We, we lucked out on, because it's funny that you brought up like who made the better bet. It's like the sale of our condo let me have the capital liquidity, and that was flush enough in 2020 to basically put most of it into the company and our loans, and it worked out. And we had, by the end of the year, we'd had another like $6 million or so of seed capital we raised, and so I got to stop supporting the company and got to get my money returned. But that that was it was hard. The cyclical nature, and we've had advisors from companies like Zappo and others of these kind of very like earlier cycle Bitcoin companies that more started in the 2012 and 13 timeframe, and they would share the same wisdom and pain and of the experience too, that you're either desperate, or it's a bear market, and so you're not able to raise money on like a truly kind of linearly up and to the right or exponentially up and to the right narrative that a lot of Silicon Valley companies may in more traditional markets, because you're just in a bear market cycle, and then you're in a bull market cycle, and so you're after having laid everyone off or laid a bunch of people off the year before, now you don't have enough people on hand to meet the customer demand that's just taking you for a huge ride. So it's that's a bit of a whip, that's a bit of a whipsaw. So that was definitely characteristic of our experience. I'm very grateful that by late 2020, we met the investors who led our Series A later the next year. That's NYDIG. And so that once we sort of had that was a $30 million round that closed, that really set us up with a much longer horizon. And like God knows at that time, when that closed, my intent was like, oh, this so much money, never seen this amount of money in our bank accounts ever before. It was just such a huge stark contrast. Thought there's ways it could be made to last forever, but no, within 2 years we need to raise our Series B, and so that was another, that's a $60 million round, and that's really thanks to our equity partners and them really seeing and believing in us too. So between those and the overall over $100 million or so we raised, we thankfully have a lot more of that kind of capital certainty. We still try to run as frugally as we can, not forget where we came from, but it's at least allow us to make more investments and make sure Unchained is around for as long as our clients will be depending on us.
How do you handle that just kind of mentally, that whipsaw? Do you have any things that you do to like ground yourself and try to escape it for a little bit, or just how do you go about again just like whipsaw of company performance but market performance plus your own personal net worth? I'm sure being a lot of Bitcoin, it goes up and down as well, so a lot going on.
It's tough. I mean, I think I could answer a couple different ways. I mean, one way is a lesson from my first business was try not to let your personal identity be too wrapped up in your company. That's a really big double-edged sword as entrepreneurs. You want to take this on personally, take everything personally, and I remember how crushing it was for every little failure, every time that client issue flared up, every time something went wrong, that it would feel like I'm failing, or feel like just really. So starting Unchained, I was kind of upfront. Well, let me try to find some things and some hobbies I can do that, an early on example for me was like learning the piano. I started that in like 2016, got a piano at home, and was doing lessons every weekend or so for a while. Did even a few little recitals to the music school I was at, and that was great. For me, there's some goals there from early on, just being able to play certain piano pieces I admired and really liked. And so even a lot of those early days when things weren't always perfect, or not even today that they are, but like when it was on the outside to look, you couldn't see if Unchained was going to be successful or not. At least I could have gotten better at the piano in that period. Another great example for me was one that later on also I got into squash. Squash is a racket sport played in a environment or room, kind of like racquetball, but with still a very different ball and different racket. So I started playing that in 2018, 19 timeframe. Again, we're still a startup then. Very, very not. No, success is not guaranteed. No way could you see through what Unchained could be at that point. And so I was playing with a friend or two at least once or twice a week. And so I'd be there in the mornings at the gym at 7:30, 8 a.m. And sometimes I'd kind of be, I'd get on myself. I'm like, should I be at the office right now? Should I be grinding, writing investor emails or doing things? But so I'm playing squash. I enjoy squash. It's good exercise. This is good for me. This is fun. And I can remember there was a time in like late 2019 when I was playing with my regular squash buddies. I've been playing together for a year or more, and we're friends at that point. And I was talking to him. I was kind of complaining about how hard fundraising was and how little success I was having in that period of raising investor dollars, and it's really important and kind of a thing. And he turned to me and was like, "Oh, you know what? I think I might want to invest, man." And I have some buddies too. I think they're probably interested too. And it's just one of those moments of just like, oh my God, like what what wonder of the universe is just out there, just to the degree like the signal of your own personal passions, personal curiosities, and kind of following those, and what that can yield in your professional life and your other areas that you could never foresee. And so yeah, that's an example of, I think, I still play squash. I played this morning, played with the same guy, and that the money that we raised, and the money that was put in by him and his friends at the time really saved us, or really just part of the ongoing the rolling fundraise experience that was there for a year or two that let us survive long enough and get far enough down the line to then pick up bigger investors and different levels of success for the company.
I love that story. That's amazing. Then I assume I'd be right to say you are a Bitcoin maxi?
That's definitely one way to put it. I mean, I just kind of squirm at labels, and
yeah,
I think there's a lot of ways. I think a lot of attitudes or things that we might carry within Bitcoin maxi land. I think are unfortunately kind of wide of, I think, a lot of what's required early on in your Bitcoin journey, which look like open-mindedness, which look like not trying to convince people by like beating them over by the head, but like meeting them where they are with things. And so yeah, I think like whether it's Bitcoin maxi or otherwise, I think
have fun,
based
same
on the
core, and
but based on my attitude, my behavior, my choice, my portfolio, my company, all those things, it's fair to label me as such. But I guess I had to insert that qualifier.
I appreciate it. Do you own any ETH or anything else?
I have, yeah, actually, honestly. So when I bought Bitcoin in 2013, I was also at the time friends with a guy, and I think it's one of the investing heuristics that I carry a lot, or I share a lot. There's a really good paper on this called "Investing in the Unknown and Unknowable," and written by a guy highly recommended by Charlie Munger. We'll ignore his comments about Bitcoin for our purposes here today, but that paper goes into this guy Zach Hauser's heuristics for good kind of like angel investments. Good investments in these things are like totally unknown, totally unknowable, if that's anything. One of them is you have a really smart friend, and they are committing themselves, or they're going into some new business in some new area you kind of know nothing about, and they're raising money. Give them money, like do it, like the just the heuristic, like the whatever basis of that sequence of smart friend making the personal commitment or going to thing, and then they're in some domain you could never know as much as they know about. That's even almost how I got into Bitcoin. But similarly, at that time, it was some friends that were like, "Oh, we're gonna go into this ETH ICO thing," and I was like, "Sure." So I put in a Bitcoin or whatever it was to that, and so that was cool. I remember that I also describe as like one of the most asymmetric things I've ever done in my life. And so in terms of, and I was, the Bitcoin I bought at that time was on Coinbase. And so this whole like Ethereum crowd sale thing I participated in, but then like, 6 months or a year later, whatever, you're still getting these instructions, like get your private key set up, or these things like, so I was like pretty clueless on that stuff. And so whatever, hour or two of brain damage I did to like get my private key, and then later on be able to like claim my Ethereum from that crowd sale, the most valuable per hour time I've ever spent in my life, just in terms of like what kind of a windfall, having bought ETH at 35 cents, was, could yield. And so, and then, I will say I sold most of it for Bitcoin in 2017. And so most of my Bitcoin stack is thanks to my Ethereum, crowd sale purchase. And I think still on the whole, that was the better financial outcome, or like necessarily like, the ETH Bitcoin sort of exchange rate was never higher than I think that 2017 period. So even though ETH has done quite well for its holders. I think that at least having rotated the Bitcoin then was nice. And so I remain curious. Again, I'm open-minded. I like that people try a lot of things. I like that, there's a coin for everyone out there if you want. But I guess at the end of the day, there's maybe more than one. But it's that's still it's still a very noisy place. And I think if people really want to get grounded and understand things and like look at things that are usually mostly worth their time or money, that most of those things probably are just like in Bitcoin, or you can find the answers for those in Bitcoin in ways you can't elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think there's so much strife between the two communities, just beyond kind of just basic human nature tribalism?
I'm glad you tribalism. Yeah, that absolutely feels like a lot of how it plays out. I mean, certain things are, just technical principles that like I think are worthy of trialing out. And just as you have other platforms that, again, it's really probably just kind of an apples to orange thing, whether it's like the VHS versus Betamax, tape formats or other certain like protocol formats and choices of things they've had to make it in kind of an engineering society. That I think from that perspective, it's really worth truly having the experiments out there in the wild of really dangerous smart contracts out there that can be hacked, and then help us all learn and see and perceive the dangers of loading so many features into very breakable, potentially breakable cryptographic systems. And so, yeah, I think that for me that part's fine, and that's good, and that can benefit people. And I think people in the Bitcoin community get to learn from what to do and what not to do in terms of what's also out there. And Bitcoin still does use a lot of cryptography and piece of technology that have been around for 30 and 40 years. They're very tested, and so they've gone through a lot of those like experiments and dumb ideas and failures, and then really robust implementations too. So I think that's some of it. Obviously, then a lot of it's like just the human nature of like greed and grift, and go start a thing because out of whatever selfish desires or other things that play out. And I mean, money is this huge panoply of projection, and like money can mean so many different things to us. It can be a tool for control, it can be a tool to extend love, it can be a tool for gifting and sharing, it can be a cool tool for taking advantage. So you just really get to see the whole human experience, and all that's just like a whole zoo of attitudes play out around people behaving and acting and doing things in the space.
What was the first thing about Bitcoin that got you excited? Was it the idea of just money not associated to government? Was it the tech of it, or something else, or a combination of all of it?
I mean, I was kind of interested at the time that we sold the business. I did have for the first time in my life, some money that I could like invest with, and so I was keen to like study between Warren Buffett and other people. I considered, I was pretty conscious early off of like we have one lifetime here, a limited amount of time to spend of that life, and so as we spend it, things like investment decisions also look like, hey, making decisions with a limited resource for hopefully your best idea, best ROI aims, and that kind of instrumentality or like instrumentally focused like reasoning and decision making on just like a cost benefit thing, or even just ROI basis like that has more limited domains. And at the time I knew where it can be applied. Going back to like the squash putty example of just like not always exactly an activity I would have thought would yield ROI to my business, but that. So yeah, I think looking at like what is the psychology of people as they adopt Bitcoin was really interesting. What is the interior process that happens as we're maybe learning and unlearning biases towards certain things when it comes to being receptive to new ideas or not. And then I just love the kind of investor psychology, behavior psychology aspect of that process, and that's just kind of that's still there for me, or still there, watching it on the edges of people understanding Bitcoin or being Bitcoin curious, but then also want to understand anything about crypto or want to lump it all together or these things. And so yeah, I think that definitely always been interested in the kind of that social side too.
Yeah. What do you think it would take for the next, I don't know, 10 million, 100 million, billion people to buy Bitcoin?
I mean, time. for sure. Just time, it's inevitable. But I think also, it's still reflexive things. Obviously, price. I think adoption by certain institutions and communities that sort of see ways it can benefit them. Whether it's like, I think the point the Vatican announces, it's Bitcoin treasury holdings or something like that, or like, the Pope, or there's like a papal statement about Bitcoin as as inherently aligned with Christian values or things. I think there's just certain things like that will help over enough time. And yeah, I mean, we all have so much to learn and unlearn about money, and so I don't know yet what the full long-term educational program looks like that we all get to participate in, that can create something different, and that's a bit it really gets at this like separates money from state kind of idea that we've gone through that experience and cycle of separating church and state, and so just separating these kind of authoritative powers that needed to be centralized and got so much of their central authority from also that centralization, this kind of like self-reinforcing cycle of whether it's moral authority or otherwise, status and hierarchical, authority for things related to those kind of religious ideas, to then now money, and then the way that you had to have central banks, you had to have centralized like money control and trust and scarcity enforcement, but then that trust can be broken and will be abused and inevitably over a long enough time period. And so why not also have something outside of that doesn't depend on central authorities? And we've only been able to have that for the last 15 years thanks to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I know for me, the biggest thing was just that understanding and education around what money was and like what it actually is. And just when you actually think about it and kind of start to study the history of money a little bit, it's a eye-opening experience. And that is kind of the initial rabbit hole that once you go down, you can't really go back from.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, consume a lifetime.
Exactly. When it comes to the ETFs and stuff, do you think that is a overall positive thing? Obviously, it will be helpful for number go up per se, but obviously that kind of centralizes Bitcoin. People aren't self-custodying. So, what are your thoughts on ETFs in general?
Yeah, overall, I mean, I think it's been a long time coming, but also I'm glad it took as long, because I do think it gave more of an opportunity for even if over the last 5 years, if there have been ETFs, I do think we'd have more like global, like per individual adoption, or like more individual investors and people that like own Bitcoin than do today, because there hasn't been an ETF for that long. But for the people that have owned it, I think there's a greater percentage now that then have also gotten self-custody, or have like, because they didn't have it as easy as an ETF made it, that they were forced into more harder worlds and harder worlds of understanding. And I think that helped create more solutions like Unchained, or give more of us that shot of getting to just a point of relevance, a point of size, a point of capability that can then ensure will be around more in the future to serve customers. So yeah, I think it's night time it came out. Glad it did when it do. I think it's still good for Bitcoin. I think that people who ultimately like deserve, or like are well served and will want to own Bitcoin as in a self-custody format, in a quote real Bitcoin format, that they'll get there eventually. So I'm not worried. We haven't seen also, I mean, we were had a lot of high-flying figures early in the year, and still do. It's been a good year for us, but like the hype around the ETFs and the launch and things like that, and the big price movements there were great for our business overall. And then even since then, we don't experience really a lot in terms of we talk to customers like true direct competition, or true direct like people trying to make a decision between Unchained and the ETF, or some things like that. So kind of fortunate in that way.
Mm-hmm. Then how about DeFi on Bitcoin? BRC20s, runes, stuff like that. Are you interested? Have you looked into it?
Honestly, I haven't looked into it a lot personally, and it's such a contested thing too. It's almost my official word of the matter is kind of like still no comment, or it's like I could feel like almost anything I say could alienate some segment of our client base. And so I'm still trying to kind of feel through my own feelings on the matter. But back to just, I think experimentation is worthy. I think Bitcoin as it can never lose, it can never forfeit to lose its use case as money and like its transactability. And so things that threaten that, or if there's like a real engineering issues that come up, it's again one thing appreciates the even the block size sort of for big dialogue of 2017 and increasing the block size or versus launching things like Segwit to answer that. I think I was still kind of quite early in my Bitcoin journey, so my opinions weren't as well developed. I think we did end up in the right place, and there was a very very concrete engineering based argument about what it looks like to increase the block size, the ramification of the scalability of the blockchain, and so you can model those things out. You can mathematically create those scenarios and draw sound conclusions from them. So I don't really have the same appreciation, or I don't have a grounding right now in how things like runes or these or the ordinal stuff affects these things. I think some of it's kind of just goofy and silly, which I like, man. I think like Bitcoin, it's serious, but it doesn't have to take it so serious. Or wants like the hope of being relevant and adopted by everybody. I think we can kind of wisen up and appreciate the 360 human experience that does include like Pepe memes that are funny and fun and those are rich in their lore and culture. So whether or not those need to like trade on Bitcoin or be a NFT thing on Bitcoin, like I just don't know. No, I mean but
yeah, when you talk about
funny.
When you talk about getting the next 10 million, 100 million people, like that's how you get people involved. Like funny, silly things, and get them into the rabbit hole to figure out what this is about. Then some of them will stick around and learn a little more.
Yes.
Then what is your view on just like the role of Bitcoin over the next 10 years, 20 years, 100 years, 1,000 years? Is it become the just like payment platform for everything? Are we spending Bitcoin to buy coffee, or is it gold? Or is it something else?
Almost certainly not gold. One of the best lines I heard, one of our podcast partners, Peter St. Ange, I think he might have been quoting something else, or like he was just like, yeah, as they say, gold's only purpose these days is to be a way to explain Bitcoin to boomers, or like I think just like kind of like that. if you're considering gold or considering it for its monetary properties, then like, boy, wait until I tell you about Bitcoin. But yeah, I think Bitcoin it's so real. I mean, it's really real. Like anything that anybody just like, oh, it sounds like Ponzi, this thing is kind of just like ask yourself, harder questions and challenge yourself to like just kind of look at hard facts and I'm just like quantitative data, like energy use and amount of miners out there and amount of NFTs, people owning Bitcoin, but also like anecdotally, who owns Bitcoin and demographically, and then on a people basis. And these are like real people that are on-chain clients, real people who hold Bitcoin as an asset that they want to pass on to their children and grandchildren, that like take it seriously as a part of their investment portfolio and as part of like how they want to, leave this world in a way that like, yeah, I passing on long-term wealth to my family in a way that transports. And, I was hanging out with a friend in New York earlier this week who he's a Jewish American and, likes, obviously feels like he's way better off than a lot of people have been historically in many other contexts, but like for his people and for people of Jewish descent that have had, awful things, awful kinds of discrimination and time periods of like, waking up in Germany in the 30s and feeling great, and then like a month later having to pack everything and leave. And so like, what does it look like to leave, and what does it look like to want to be able to transport your family's wealth across land and time, and just the kind of use case Bitcoin could serve for those kinds of instances. So it's so real. And so that's why I kind of keep making that point. I think for now it's still in this time period of like really stewing in and becoming part of people's like household wealth, household assets, and that's going to further serve as a source of gravity for other things to it. Payments being one. It's a natural place over the next 10, 20 years that between Lightning Network and other layers on Bitcoin that I think it will serve as just like a settlement layer, settlement backend to more faster and smaller kind of transaction sizes that we get to make with each other and with businesses. And then as just a big gravity well of a really scarce, valuable digital asset. Yeah, the application, the future application. I'm not courageous enough, and I to like venture out into me like predictions on that end. I think that's a lot. I depend on my co-founder for in terms of a lot of his theses for the layers of markets on Bitcoin and the potential applications that come from that. But I think it will be, because it's also digital and software. It's like it won't have that kind of gold problem of like, yeah, you just get to like, it's just a rock, and then cool, we can like make the rock into electronic components and have, these industrial use cases that leverages chemical properties. Those are great, but that Bitcoin, its chemical properties might change and mute, or we might have ways to use those properties in more clever ways. And so that is a little bit what we see when we talk about those runes and BRC20 things that I just don't know enough about, so I can't say otherwise. So yeah, we'll see. It's exciting though, and it's still a place that you can mine a lot of curiosity out of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that might be the most exciting part of it, just the uncertainty of it, of how it's going to play out. And so, Joe, I really appreciate your time. This was awesome conversation. I got 2 questions to finish it out for you. First one is the stash. Looks great. How long have you been rocking it?
Oh gosh, probably about like 6 months or so. It was summer of 22 that I went on a trip with family, didn't save, and kind of came back. I was like, I'm gonna keep a goat around, and so I did the goat thing for a while until 6 months ago. My wife was like, kind of wonder what about you to try just a mustache? What would you like? So I just what you say, honey? Sure. And so been kind of mustache ever since, but it's been fun. Yeah, every now and then you got to try to grow something new. This is kind of one way I've tried that.
Yeah, it's a natural look for you. Looks great.
Thanks.
Then the final question is a question I ask all guests is, what is your why? Why do you do what you do?
Yeah. I think there's just knowing me, there's just a thirst for knowledge, a thirst for curiosity. I collect books. I've got like 1,000+ books at home. I still, as a kind of middle-aged adult here, I'm still trying to know always why. Sometimes those reasons of wanting to know aren't always from reasons of love and security and self-worth. Sometimes they come from the opposite. So I think about those kind of clean versus dirty fuels that we can use for motivation at times. But yeah, when it's a clean fuel, it's really about having the kind of knowledge and wisdom to put myself and the people around me at like really good society serving aims. And then the other factor for me is always just feeling like Unchained, if we had to pack up and go home tomorrow, that everyone here, their lives were bettered as just an employee. They had a career experience that would help them get a better job, or they had just an experience that was one of their most rewarding professional experiences they could hope to have. So that unlike a lot of the things in startups is somewhat within our control, how we treat people and how we organize ourselves and how we behave with each other. So that also kind of keeps me up and keeps me coming to work.
I love it. And if people want to get in touch with you or inspired and want to check out more about Unchained or reach out about potentially using your services, where's the best place for them to reach you guys at?
Yeah. The Unchained part is easy. It's unchained.com. Personally, I can be reached at joe@unchained.com. That's my email address, or on Twitter @JosephKelly.
Awesome. We'll have those linked in the show notes so people can easily find you. But Joe, thanks again, man. This is great.
Thanks, Nick. Enjoy being here.